Hey everybody, I want to welcome you to Fast Track Coaching. My name is Dane Sanders, and we have been doing this for about 3.5 years, every Tuesday, having special guests on the show to talk through creativity and business and how to move things forward. And today is a really special show for me on a lot of fronts. Noah Scalen is someone I met at South by Southwest this past year. He is someone who, we have a common friend and a guy named Todd Henry. And Todd's been on the show, some of you guys might remember, in the past. And what's great about this conversation is it's someone who is both artistic and creative and a business person and also not a photographer. And it's really helpful to bring folks from outside of our little myopic ecosystem once in a while to get to know and understand and probably even see more of what we're doing in a new light. And that's the hope certainly today, and also the chance for me to develop a new friendship. If you're unfamiliar with the show, the way things work is it's really just a conversation. It goes for about half an hour. And because this is pre-recorded and both Noah and I are going to be in the chat room when it broadcasts live, you're going to have a chance to interact with us, ask Noah any questions you have, and just engage from there. But we hope it's beneficial. We're not here to change the world. We're just here to kind of move you and your creativity and your business a little bit further this week. And we hope you get a couple nuggets in that process. But without further ado, Noah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too, man. It was really great to get to see you and hear you present at South by Southwest this past year in Austin, and to have the commonality in Todd. That was really fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, as I've gotten to know you and you graciously sent me your book and I had a chance to look through it, it's fantastic. You wrote a book called Unstuck, 52 Ways to Get and Keep Your Creativity Flowing at Home, at Work, and in Your Studio. And it was a perfect complement to what Todd brings with Accidental Creative. You're an artist, you're a designer, you're an activist. I want to hear more about what that means.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about your journey as a professional creative.
Wow, how far back should I start?
Well, you know, I was born a small black man, you know, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, well, both my parents are artists, so I definitely come from a unique environment in that when I was a kid, I would bring friends over and say, you want to go play in the studio? And they'd go, what's a studio? And to me, it was like, what do you mean, what's a studio? It's like, what's the living room? What's the kitchen? It's a room you make art in. Everybody's got one of those, right? So, you know, I mean, obviously an unusual upbringing in that way, but I always considered myself an artist. I always imagined I would be making art, but my parents had gone to school for fine art and they were teachers, and I didn't want to be a teacher, so I thought I got to do something else. I ended up studying theater design, actually, in school. And then right as I was graduating, realized that I was enjoying graphic design more, and so I went into graphic design as a career right out of school, started getting work doing it freelance, got a couple jobs, and eventually ended up running my own company starting in 2001, doing graphic design and consulting work. So sort of ended up doing design as my way of making art to make money. And then what's been happening the last few years with like this book Unstuck is that I actually developed a project a few years ago called Skull a Day. That was my sort of personal art project to get out of my own being stuck creatively and feeling like I was in a rut and just doing the same things over and over. So I decided that I needed to do something totally for myself, and that project just sort of blew up and turned into this crazy new career, which is me talking about creativity, traveling a lot, doing lectures, and having this really wonderful time of sort of transformation, but still making art and still making money, which is, you know, a great combination.
So, okay, so let me repeat back what I'm hearing, because it's a pretty interesting journey to hear you say, okay, so your parents are fine artists and teachers, and you decide, I'm not going to be a teacher. And you fast forward to the end of the story, and now you're a teacher. Yeah, got it. So, and I love that the way you described kind of the studio as like a living room, where that was kind of the air you breathed or the water you swam in, and that makes a ton of sense to me. And I'm also struck by this notion of, you know, you found yourself doing the same thing over and over and over again, and then you decided to do Skull a Day, which is making a skull over and over and over again.
Yeah. Okay, so when you put it that way. Yeah.
So, but talk, because I hear the nuance in that. There really is distinction in what you're describing. But for the folks who are listening at home, talk a little bit about there's some creative irony in this. There's how can a creative project of doing the same thing over and over again be new every day? Talk a little bit about that process for you.
Well, boy, there's a lot to that. I mean, part of it was that I realized that I was kind of stuck in the way of, I was doing what clients were asking me to do. I was just, you know, creating work that felt like a repeat in terms of like I'd already solved the problem before, and there wasn't a new solution. It was just, oh, what, you know, do your thing again. and I wasn't excited by it. I mean, the thing that made me excited about design work was this opportunity to problem solve and be creative in solutions, you know, and create art that had a purpose, that was doing something. And so I kind of lost all that just, you know, from the sheer force of doing it for so long. And so it seems obvious, you know, I guess inverse to try to then do something over and over and over as the solution. But because it was just for me, it was making me make art for myself, which was great. But I don't have any incentive to make art unless somebody else is, you know, a client's telling me to do it. And so this was my way of having sort of a reason to do it. Was okay. Here's the boss. Here's the you know the rule that I've got to make art now. I've got this rule. I've got to get it done. And having the limitations of making a skull, having the limitations of making it done in a day, those actually weren't limitations, because what they did was they freed up my creativity to do the fun part, which was I already knew I was making a skull, so I didn't have to spend half my day going, what am I going to make today, which is a daunting thing. Or that, well, what, you know, it might take a week or a month or a year to make something, and that also, you know, becomes daunting and also something that you give up on. And so by having it be just a day, just a skull, you know, those limitations were really the things that freed up my creativity, that allowed me to be like, okay, so how do I solve this problem today? What am I going to do to get this done? And part of it is that I decided to make a different skull every day, which is a terrible thing to decide to do because it's horribly overwhelming. It's ridiculous.
Especially for impossible. 365 of them.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, and I really was like, oh, I can't top myself every day. It's not going to get, you know, every day I've got to do the best I can do. But it was really daunting because I'm a perfectionist. So this is a horrible task to take on.
Gosh, there's so many pieces in what you're bringing up that I'm excited to get into in this conversation. And the first one that struck me was this notion of doing what clients are paying you to do and having that be kind of your exclusive enterprise. And I know in the photography world, that's certainly the temptation. It's rare, and this is an indictment. I hate this, but it's rare for me, unless I have great intention around a personal project, to ever pull out my camera for anything apart from getting paid, except to say, again, like personal projects, like my kids, my family, like that's fun for me. I love it.
Right.
But even more kind of overtly creative, where I pick a themed project that has maybe some inherent limits built in. I'm reminded of things like, as a writer, when I do my own writing stuff, the gift of something like Twitter is it creates this massive limit where I have to actually get creative in 140 characters, or actually 120 if I want to get retweeted. And that idea of limit around the creative process and interrupting the automatic of only working when you're getting paid, it seems like that's a very humanizing effort, and gets people back to this idea of probably what art was initially, which wasn't just commissioned work, but really was expression. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think humanizing is a good word, because one of the things I talk a lot about is letting go of preciousness. Because I think that when we're doing creative work, you know, especially because we're doing it for clients or it's for a show, or, you know, that it's always got to be this perfect thing. It's got to be so good, and then it becomes so attached to it, and we end up that possessiveness around it, that perfectionism around it, becomes this, I think, sort of sucks the creativity out of it. It ends up being this thing that's no longer fun, because now it's about this, you know, technical perfection, or it's about this approval from someone. And by putting these limits on myself, I ended up sort of having to just get things done. And it was just knocking stuff out. And sometimes, yeah, it was going to be okay, but sometimes it just made me do things that I wasn't going to normally do, because I would be like, I'm not comfortable doing this. This isn't my wheelhouse. This isn't my skill set. And instead I was like, I got to do something. So I'm going to do this thing. And I've never tried this before. And almost every time I did that, I learned something and I made good work, and sometimes work that I certainly would never have been, you know, made before, and pushed myself beyond where I thought I was comfortable doing or capable of doing even.
Well, one of the things that struck me about the Skull a Day project, and if you want to go see it, you guys, as we're talking, it's just skull. Is it skull-day.com or just skulladay.com?
You can get there either way.
Either way. Okay, you're very, look at you. You're all clever. So skulladay.com, and you see some of these examples. The one that pops to mind for me that was probably my favorite, and there's a lot of favorite ones for me, was the bike chain skull. And and just the way that you would introduce it. And it's funny, now I'm seeing skulls everywhere. I can't. You kind of ruin me. Well, I bet you're cursed for like ever. But in that idea, like you mentioned earlier, that art, creating art that is doing something, and I want to understand a little bit more what that means. Because how in the world could the idea of creating 365 skulls be doing something? And I know there's something here, and there's nuance here, because again, the conversation around personal projects is, we are having that as photographers every day, all the time, because especially in the commercial world, editorial world, if you're not getting paid and you want to create new work for your book, your portfolio, you have to be out working and doing personal projects where you're actually paying to work so that you can put it on display and a client will like it enough, or stylistically it'll be in line, and then they'll hire you to create some work. Now, when you say art is doing something, and photographers are thinking through, how can I come up with a personal project? Most of the conversations I have with people they feel paralyzed. They're like, okay, it has to be meaningful, and I have to really like it, and it has to work so it'll contribute to my portfolio, and that actually, it's like claustrophobic for a lot of people, and then they just don't do it, and then they wait until they have either the perfect project, or they just don't do it and just do it until they get paid.
Yeah, and that's totally common. I mean, that's, I think, most people's response. It's horribly daunting. You know, the thing about Skull a Day was that it wasn't about a specific outcome, though I got a ton out of it. It was really about my passion. You know, it was something I enjoyed doing. I think that's really important, because it was work. It was hard. There were things that was very difficult to accomplish, but it was still more fun than anything else I could have been doing. I mean, you know, my own work that was ultimately mine, that I think of the project as a year of first draft. I did all this work that I could then build on or license or do all this great stuff with, but in the moment it was just about the experiences I was having each day.
You know, it's funny. I take it back. I said my favorite was the chain. That's not true. I think your Sir Mix-a-Lot cassette tape is my favorite, actually.
Day 2 of the project.
I think that's awesome.
Which, I got to tell you, you know, that felt like a failure that day to me. I mean, I didn't think I did very well. I just thought, oh, you know, it's good enough, and I'll put it out there for people. But I kind of thought, oh, you know, I probably could have worked harder and made that better. And I think that's important, because I think that's part of that preciousness. I probably never would have shared that piece in normal life. You know, certainly never shown a client something like that.
But I'm guessing that was one of your most popular ones from people.
It was very popular when I put it out there. It's funny, it's simple, you know, it's an idea that it resonates with people, but I didn't necessarily know that. You know, I mean, sometimes we're so in our heads, it's so internal, and so to like do a project like this where it was very external. And you know, a big key was that it wasn't just a project for me that was personal, but that it was social, that it was put online, that it was allowing people to interact. That most of the good stuff came out of that, actually. You know, I could have been saving this and collecting this for a book or for a gallery exhibition. I don't know whether I would have gotten that out of it. Whereas I did get books and gallery exhibitions out of it by putting it out there publicly and sharing my each day's work, whether it was, you know, the best thing I'd ever produced or just good enough to be done.
Well, it's funny, like the Sir Mix-a-Lot one in particular, which, if you're not familiar with the piece, if you haven't gone to his website yet, you should. But there's a white kind of cut up old cassette tape of Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby's Got Back. And the reason that struck me is a couple things. One, I make up in my head that there might not have been as much strategy as I think there was around the choice of that song or whatever. But if I see it, even if there was a lot of intention on your part, I don't know what's going on in your heart and mind. I make up all this meaning around that, and now all of a sudden I'm engaging the piece, and the piece now becomes meaningful for me. That has, you know, nothing to do with the original intent of the artist, and it's like it's a very dynamic, interactive art piece. Was there intention there for you?
Yes and no. I mean, the great thing about art, and I think especially I was lucky in that I used a skull image, is that it does resonate with people. That people could interpret every image how they wanted, and each one meant something to me. But it didn't matter to me whether it meant the same thing as to the person that was viewing it.
Now, you mentioned a little earlier on kind of some of the challenges of pre-deciding, like taking a personal project, hoping that it'll be of benefit, knowing that it might not be, but the temptation to kind of prefab an outcome where my goal is to have a gallery, or my goal is to get a book, or my goal is to whatever, so I'm going to be building content in that direction, as opposed to, in a sense, kind of creating for creating's sake, see what gets created, and then go, where would be a natural form for that to land? And that reminds me of a conversation I had a while back on the show with a guy named Trey Ratcliff, he's a high dynamic range photographer, and he's done very, very well, has a very cool travel blog. But he has this real bias around creating a firewall between the creative process and the commercial process. And and he's very fortunate in that he's been successful enough where his lifestyle allows him to basically travel and create for 6 months, get home and figure, oh my gosh, what am I going to do to monetize these really cool things that I created? And and for him, that it works great. But would you go that far and say that it's like that there ought to be some kind of holy space that's just for the creative act that should be distinct from, you know, the impurity of selling out? What do you think?
It's a good question. You know, I'm tempted to say yes, because I think that if I had made my project the whole time thinking, well, is this a sellable picture? Is this a useful thing? I wouldn't have felt as confident about just putting it out there. You know, I wouldn't have let go of that concern of preciousness, because I would have been like, oh, I got it. This has got to hit this mark. This has got to, you know, I did feel obliged to satisfy the audience that was looking at it. And certainly, you know, I wanted them to have positive feedback, but ultimately the goals were my own and I was free to adjust them as I went. And I did, you know, things changed along the way, which was really cool. I mean, the project was really just about me making art, but by the end it was about this community that had developed around it and them sharing it with me. The site still exists only because there's a community that have just been endlessly sending in their own skulls, and fans of the site run it now. I mean, so we're about to hit year 6, the beginning of year 6 of the project in June, and that's entirely because, you know, I let the fans determine what this was, what this project really was, and it wasn't what I set it out. I mean, you know, I set out to make 365 skulls, and not this, but this is what's really cool, is what's happened.
So you mentioned the fan thing, and I'm mindful of again some other players who've done some really clever things online. I think of like Gary Vaynerchuk with his wine library, and how he would do this daily New Jersey style review of wine as he owns a liquor store. And it was clever, but he had basically nobody paying attention to him for 3 years. A daily show, radical commitment to it, and then eventually it picked up and he became a gazillionaire. But in your case, how many people were paying attention to Skull a Day at the beginning, in contrast to like a month in, 6 months in, a year in, now 6 years in?
Yeah. So 2 days, it was for the first 2 days it was 0. It was just me. Third day I told 100 people, and then within a couple weeks it was thousands of people from all over the world.
No kidding.
So it was a way more rapid increase than I expected. I kind of was thinking, hey, by the end there'll be an international audience. That would be fun. Maybe I'll be lucky. And it just happened that some friends started sharing it, and it spread really fast, really quick. That was overwhelming and daunting in its own way, but it's been great because it just sort of maintained a fairly decent level of audience pretty much consistently afterwards. And it could have ended right when I finished. You know, I mean, there was a nice build. People were excited to see where I was going, and I thought, you know, what am I going to do after this? But because people were submitting things to me, I kept the site going, and so it's maintained and grown an audience. I mean, there's a whole audience that doesn't really know the project from me. They know it from just, oh, there's a site where you can go see skulls every day of all different kinds of work. So, you know, that's this interesting growth. But there is that commitment piece. I mean, I don't. A lot of people do want to have it be like huge right away, and I don't. Who knows? I mean, sometimes things do that, but not always. And if you do stick with stuff, I do see that almost everybody who's really consistent and sticks with things for, you know, a year, stuff eventually happens. But, you know, that's a long time to wait if you really are like, I need this immediate feedback, you know. And, you know, it starts out with your friends. So.
Right. Well, were you in regardless? Do you think you would have seen it through if nobody had paid attention?
Probably. I mean, I think as long as my mom was commenting every day, I would be.
That's good. Well, I appreciate what you're saying about the commitment piece, because it does seem like, from a creative perspective, you want to pick a project that's interesting enough to hold your attention, that will, just for your own kind of personal integrity, that you'll see it all the way through, even though there's some projects you're going to need to set aside and so forth. But that really strikes me as interesting. And what also strikes me is the theme of skulls. Like, how much of the popularity would you say attributed to choosing a very, I mean, a skull is an icon. Like, it's iconic by its nature. Were you just into pirates? I mean, like, why skulls? And do you think that that contributed to the rapid response to it?
It's interesting because, yeah, I did like pirates as a kid. My parents were artists, so I was around anatomical imagery. I always liked them. It's funny because I didn't think it through. I really just randomly had the thought to do it, and I was like, yeah, I like skulls. Sure, I'll do this. They got huge right around the same time. Damien Hirst's piece that a lot of people know, The Diamond Encrusted Skull, came out, I think, within a month of me starting. Wow. So it was like, the timing was right. I mean, within that year, Walmart was suddenly carrying skull T-shirts. It became very acceptable, and so I think that benefited me in that there was, I didn't care if it was only going to be heavy metal kids and goth kids and subversive folks who liked it. That would have been fine, but the fact that anybody could see it, and that when families were bringing their kids there, and it wasn't so daunting to be like, ooh, this isn't Satan worshiping, this is just a cool piece of art, and our kids already have it on their backpacks, so it's okay.
Right.
So it was just luck that it kind of worked out. But I mean, obviously there's a history of art, skull, imagery and art back to the earliest times. So
absolutely,
it makes sense, and it made sense for me because I was also really interested in this idea of living fully in the moment every day, and that project became was about that. And then of course the skull as the memento mori, is the reminder of death, was perfect. It was like, yeah, I'm meditating on death, but engaging in life fully every day. And that was an amazing experience that I also didn't quite get what I was really committing to when I did the project, but it transformed the way I see the world. I mean, just in the way that you said you start to see skulls everywhere. I mean, that is, that's transformative to be like, oh, I'm perceiving my world differently. That's a good thing, especially as a photographer. I got to imagine if you're able to see things in a new light, that's going to change the way you work.
Well, I think it's true for all, for anyone who's trying to pursue the creative process. I think changing perspective, putting on a new metaphorical lens, all of those kinds of ideas, I think, make a ton of sense. But you actually raise a really interesting point, because I'd love to turn the corner and talk a little bit about, well, two things before we're done. One, I'm curious what you think about being a creative artist, especially a service-based artist, where you're commissioning and you're doing work and that sort of thing. You're not just teaching in a digital world where everyone can rip off your works pretty quickly. Curious about that. And what I really want to come back full circle around is a conversation about an outsider's perspective on an industry like photography. And I'll get to that part in a minute. But first of all, any kind of musings around our times, being an artist in a digiflat era?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful time. I really, I got to see enough of pre-digital design because my dad was teaching that stuff, and it looked horrible to me. I actually am really glad that we've got these tools. It makes it so easy to, yes, I can take 100 photos if I need to, and the expenditure is nil. And
that's right.
And I can immediately know if I got the shot I needed and go back and change it. I mean, that's an unbelievable thing. Obviously, it does allow too for people to be, clients to be like, let's change it 1,000 times, and that's a nightmare. Yeah. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. And obviously the other piece of it is that people can steal it easier, but I'm not so worried about that. My work has actually been stolen, and I had to work with my lawyer to deal with that issue. And but ultimately I made more money off of them stealing it than had I sold it in the first place. So who cares? Good. I'll find them and track them down. But in terms of a lot of my work I put out there, it's Creative Commons license. I want people to use it. I encourage it. I want people to send me what they've done with it. It creates a wonderful, that builds the community around my work, because then people are sharing with me and connecting with me that wouldn't have if they'd just seen it somewhere in the past, where it would have been just, oh, that's that thing, and I have no access to it, and I don't even know how I would get access to it, and it's just this other. And then I think that actually encourages people sometimes to steal, because they don't feel like they can reach the artist, whereas now you can email me. I'm very accessible.
That's right.
So to me, all of it is great, and I just, it's funny because I know a lot of people are saying, well, I'm keeping things to myself. I'm not putting them online because I'm afraid to steal them. So what? You've got more good in you, and anybody has to steal your stuff, it's only going to build your rep, or, hey, maybe you'll make some money after you sue them, so,
Well, I mean, there's no question the idea of the benefits. If your idea or your creation is valuable, you want good ideas to spread. That's an adage a lot of folks buy into. And also you want to figure out a way to feed the kids and stay, have it be viable. And there's whole great business models around long tail, and even the guy I mentioned earlier, Trey Ratcliff, in the photo world, he intentionally encourages people to take his music as long as it's not for commercial use, or not his music, his art. And when people want that, then he is quick to monetize, not a problem. But the other complaint I hear a lot, and I'm curious what you think, especially in the art world, design world, is around, because the tools are so powerful, they're getting less and less expensive. Anyone can get, decently proficient on with Illustrator and some YouTube videos. I mean, when I say decently, I mean like they can participate. There's no barrier to entry to create, and there's tools have never been more accessible to create with, which in my world creates a scenario where there's an incredible amount of new photographers coming in the game. And at the highest level, some amazing work, because the tools can leverage and you can go even further. And I think actually that's where the huge ceiling room is I wish we could get more creative rather than just kind of copying each other. But the challenge, of course, is that there's so much bad photography. There's so much, now everyone can play. Well, it's like giving people the tools to make a website. Well, you can make a lot of really bad websites, and everyone can make one. So what are your thoughts on that dynamic of our times?
Yeah, well, it's funny because we kind of went through that in the graphic design world, I would say a little earlier, because the mid-90s, that was desktop publishing. And suddenly everyone was a designer. Everyone's secretary could do their newsletter, so we didn't need you anymore as a designer.
Right.
And everything looked the same and everything was bad. And what happened is that it turned around because people started saying, you know what, I'd like something to stand out. I'd like some good work. I'm going to hire a professional to do this now. And so in a way, there was this sudden sea of everyone doing this and everyone could do it, but it just forced people to do a better job that were mediocre before, that were getting by because they didn't have to worry about it. And it obviously some people didn't get work, or some people got work that shouldn't have, or whatever, but on the other side of it, I think we all ended up better off for it, because yes, people had access, and suddenly there were people who actually, I always think, like, how many amazing artists were there out there that just didn't get the
chance,
nod of the king, or didn't get the access to equipment because they were too poor. And now, we've got this wonderful opportunity to see some really great stuff, but it means you got to bring it, right? I mean, that's the thing, is like, you'll still be a better photographer if you have a better, photography brain than somebody who just has the same camera as you. And I think the same thing with the technology. Like, anybody knows Photoshop, and I tell this to my students when I teach too, like, you're not going to get hired for your ability to use the software, because anybody can learn that. You're going to get hired because of how you think. So that's what you have to be developing, is your unique vision. And then that's what you're going to sell, and that's what's going to be really, unique about you, and what's going to bring people to you specifically.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that uniqueness also creates scarcity, and the scarcity creates value. There's only one of you, all those kinds of things.
Develop a brand, right?
Sure.
Of particular work, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so I want to turn the corner, Noah, and ask your there's no liability here. You can get it all wrong. So no need for kind of death by qualification or any of that sort of thing. Just kind of from your gut, as someone who's maybe, and I'm making an assumption. I know you are a photographer, but I'm guessing you're not actively a professional photographer. Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I use photography in the work that I do, but I've never put myself out there as hire me as a photographer for whatever. I'm glad I don't have to do that, because then I don't have to, know the lingo and have the right equipment. So
perfect. Okay. So you're a great candidate, and even what you said a moment ago of, like, graphic design, in a sense, kind of going through the drill before photography, maybe before music, maybe before books. What are we not seeing in these other industries that maybe you have some eyes to see, or again, I don't want to position it so that you feel like you're having to overstate it. Just be candid. What do we not see that we wish we could see, that we're going to see down the line, but if we saw it sooner, man, it might save us a little bit of pain?
As an industry, as photography.
As an industry like photography, yeah.
That's an interesting thing. Because I have not thought about this at all. So you really, this is fresh off the top of my head.
Right. And again, this is just coffee time, folks. We're just having a conversation, and you're listening in. So, if you don't want to go for it, no problem. But I am really curious if you have any insights.
Well, I guess, give me a little more qualification for, like, in terms of, like, your ability to work in the digital realm, or in terms of, like, the competition, in terms of the... Great
question. Yeah, I should be more specific. So I'm thinking, like, our folks who are viewing and watching this either on replay or live, the challenge everywhere is, there's real people who are really hurting, and they love the craft of photography. There's massive separations. Like, there's folks who really know what they've been doing. They've been doing it for a long time. They made the jump from analog to digital, and they're still making it, but their lament, of course, is that there's newer photographers coming in, kind of quote unquote ruining it. But it's not really their fault, because the folks who are coming in, there's no barrier to entry. They're excited just as like those guys were, but they're not high fidelity photographers yet.
Right.
They're just kind of they're convenience photographers. They're in it because they can see the picture in the back, and the learning curve is less steep, and they're participating. And I guess in that culture, there's culture of fear. There's culture of it's not going to work. If you're a photojournalist, you're getting fired from a newspaper. In that kind of a culture, it's really tempting to be in a constant state of sounding the alarm. And there's a lot of negativity. There's polarization. Somebody puts something out there, it's like they either get celebrated and held up as the establishment, or they get squashed and killed because somehow that's inappropriate or wrong. And there's really understandable motivations behind all of these responses. But I guess from a wisdom perspective, based on just your own experience, like how do you go navigating the culture that we're in a way that's most resourceful and most constructive as a professional creative?
Okay, so there's two sort of things that makes me think about, and I'm going to try to make sure I remember both. So one has to do with jealousy.
Okay.
Other has to do with I'm already losing it. I'll make up on jealousy, and then I'll remember what the second one was. Okay. I think it's interesting because I think that we all have that, like, other people, I've worked so hard, and then here's this person, they got this job, or they're coming up and they don't know what they're doing, and yet, whatever, or their work is so good, and it's all of that stuff where it's very, there's a lot of ego in what we're doing. It's personal work. There's that preciousness I talk about in terms of like putting yourself out there, and it's your baby, and that there's this whole like, you get defensive around it because you want to protect it, and I think all that stuff. If you can channel that energy, with that tendency towards that, like, they're taking, and put it back onto, like, what can I do? Instead of what are they doing, or how can I get what they've got, or how come they're getting what I should be getting, or all of that nonsense is wasted energy. You should be creating, instead of worrying about what they got, make more what you do better at what you do, create great stuff. I mean, that's good. What's going to get you something, if you put a better body of work out there, you put more out there that's more interesting, you spend more time on your own stuff, developing it, there's where you're going to get stuff. Chasing other people around and trying to put them down and trying to, prove that they're wrong gets you nothing except looking like a crotchety old man. I mean, it doesn't benefit you. I think the other piece of it that I was thinking of was that, I see this with clients with design work where there's a little bit of a like, why can't they see that this is good design, and this is, why did they hire that person, or look at how ugly that website is, or they've done such a, and to a certain degree we have to accept that we're the, as the experts, we know what the best is, but if the general public doesn't know or can't distinguish, does actually matter then, right? I mean, are we, obviously we're trying to teach them what good is, right? Here's good photography, here's bad, here's good design, here's bad. But if they accept then it's just about us being like fighting amongst ourselves. And so you kind of have to let it go at a certain point and be like, obviously you can spend time educating, which is great, but you can also just be like, look, if people are comfortable with taking this level of work and they're going to pay for it, that's just the way that is. And again, all your energy sort of fighting that thing could be spent making other stuff and something wonderful and making new things. And it's interesting because I think what can happen is that the people that do the things the old-fashioned way then become the experts in a niche, and that's a wonderful thing to do. I mean, as more people learn the digital stuff, the people that don't do digital are going to be valuable because they don't, because the new people won't know that, and each new technology comes along, and I find that myself where I'm resistant to learn the latest software, and so yes, somebody else is going to come up and do that then, and I won't, and then that just won't be the kind of work I produce, and that's fine. They're going to come to me for something else. I never want to be everything to all people because I'm not going to do that well. Right. But if I do what I do really well, and people know I can produce a consistent, good product, I'll get paid for that. I'll continue to do that thing. I'll show people, and also that I'm pleasant to work with. I mean, there's also these too. I mean,
well, yeah, I guess being someone that you like to be around probably helps your business.
Absolutely. I tell students, I mean, you're also getting hired by if you can stand to be around you. I mean, I've had photographers that I've hired, and then the client and them clash, and it's horrible, and then I look like a jerk for bringing this person in, but I just didn't know their personalities didn't mesh.
Yeah.
That can be a real problem.
Well, so much of what you're saying resonates, and you're saying a lot more than what I'm going to succinct it into. But one of the things that's really hitting home for me is just the question of resource. Like like if I find myself in a critical position, or maybe it's envy, maybe it's jealousy, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just like morally, like I think it's wrong that these people are doing this, or that the industry's going in a certain kind of way. That it's just not. It doesn't matter what my feelings on the issue is. That is what's happening. That's reality.
Yeah.
And it would be more resourceful to take that energy and actually go make something, go create something.
Exactly.
And it's one of the reasons, again, and an easy transition to plug on this. Guys, go get this. Unstuck by Noah Scalin is it's on the shelves. You can get it anywhere you want where books are sold. And it's basically a once a week for a year set of projects, or however case you want to go. And I've gone through it. It's fantastic, man. Like very cleverly put together. And I looked at it and I went, this would be a great. You could do a skull a day kind of version project just by taking this book and doing this for a year, pretty easily.
But the bonus is you could just do one thing here or there too. You know, if you just were in a moment where you're like, I need an idea, this book might give you one. And they're silly projects. They're not meant to be serious. They're actually, I kind of call it an activity book for adults. You know, I think it's just like that stuff that we used to do when things were fun, when we were wacky and did creative stuff, and it wasn't so serious and all about trying to, please a client or make the money, and just have fun with art.
Well, and I love it. I love also, too, how you brought in so many great people to help in the process, because now it also introduces folks, gives people the chance, especially if you're a photographer and you're watching this, you can expand the cross-pollination of input and really get exposed to some other really cool people. So thank you for creating this. Thanks for being on the show. And I hope we get a chance to keep this conversation going. It's just a total privilege to get to know you, man.
You're very welcome. I had a lot of fun, and I look forward to the next opportunity to talk with you.
All right. So if this is valuable to you guys at home, be sure to thank, one, our sponsor, Adorama, so at Adorama. And number two, if you want to follow Noah on the Twitter, I'm assuming you're at Noah Scalin. Is that right?
Indeed.
So NOAHCSCALAN. NOAHSCALAN. And thank him for being on the show, because it's always a gift when these folks jump on. So thanks again, Noah.
Thank you.
All right.